Hello and welcome to another edition of the Leader Campus Talks. I'm Mel Wildermuth, and with me is Marcia Reynolds. And Marcia has a doctorate in psychology, MCC, expert in difficult conversations, speak and train on leadership's emotional intelligence, coaching, top leadership coach. So the first question, thank you first of all for being here with me.
Yeah,
and the first question is MCC. What is MCC?
Well, the International Coach Federation is the largest certifying body for coaches in the world. They have like nearly 35,000 members. And their top designation, they have 3 tiers for coaching. Their top designation is Master Certified Coach. And I was in the top 20 of the first people in the world to earn Master Certified Coach. And I want to say nearly 20 years ago. So, yeah.
Well, congratulations. That's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
How much time did it take to become a Master Certified Coach?
Well, you need to log 2,500 hours of coaching besides at least 125 hours of training. So I've been through accredited training programs. As well as mentoring hours. And back then, we also had to have so many hours that we give to our profession, which I did. I was the 5th global president of the International Coach Federation. And I still speak at coaching conferences around the world. So I'm a coach advocate.
Do you have to keep certification up each year or?
Every 3 years.
Every 3 years.
You have a renewal, and there's continuing education that's designated to coach the coaching competencies. So it's not just going to any seminar. You have to identify. It should be an accredited program, and I always have my own coach.
Yeah.
To keep sharp on what I do, and also for my own coaching, because I believe in coaching. I think it's great to have someone to process things with.
Well, in your coaching. And since you are an expert in difficult conversations, what's the most difficult conversation for a leader, you think?
The most interesting thing is because I teach coaching skills for leaders all over the world, and I do demonstrations, and it's almost the same issue that they bring to me every time when I ask for a volunteer, is that they've got to have a performance conversation. And often it's they know they need to let the person go. They've already had this conversation a number of times, or maybe move them in the organization, demote them, but it's a negative quote in their mind. It's negative, and they think it's going to cause a lot of emotion in the other person. So they're scared to death of dealing with someone else's emotions. But the interesting thing, Mel, is what I find after coaching them is it's not as much that they're afraid of handling someone else's emotions as it is that having this conversation, they may have to accept that maybe they weren't the perfect leader. And so the whole concept that people are going to judge me as not being good enough, I'm judging myself as not being good enough. And that's what makes it so difficult.
How do you approach that then? What kind of suggestions do you have for somebody who faces that kind of situation?
The first thing, and this is again why I love coaching, is that most of the time leaders don't even know that's their block until we start getting it out. And it's an interesting thing about fear. Fear is this amorphous thing until we make it real. And as soon as we make it real and we can see it, it's almost like, oh, I know how to deal with that. So it's more about, can I really help you look at what's your block, what's your difficulty, what's really your challenge here? And once they, can say, well, yes, yeah, I am concerned that there's something else that I'm not doing and I'm not good enough. That oftentimes I say, well, have you tried everything? And they say yes. And I said, good leaders do try lots of things.
Yeah.
And I'm sensing that because you care so much, you are a good leader. So what is it you really need right now? Is it another technique or just the support to do what you think you need to do? And they always say, yes, I know what I need to do, and probably I don't even need support. So,
Do,
it's just recognizing what the real challenge is. And oftentimes they know what it is they need to do once they recognize it.
do you think that there's enough information written on the aspects of fear in leadership concentration, I guess?
That's an interesting thing. When you say enough written on it, I'm sure there's blog posts and articles, but I'm not sure I can even recall a book that's just dedicated to the fear of the leader. That's a great idea.
Well, thank you. maybe I should write that one. But
Yeah.
I'm not a psychologist, so.
Yeah. But Mel, in my book, The Discomfort Zone, I do look at underneath most people's difficulties and challenges. And it's often a fear. What's the fear that's stopping this smart person from moving forward on their own is the question. Yeah.
With your book, you also approach the idea of intelligence, emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
How important is that also in this dealing with fear?
Well, emotional intelligence starts with actually what I call reflective intelligence. To be able to even recognize I'm having an emotion seems to be one of the most difficult things in our, and it's not just our society, it's I have this all over the world. We pay so much attention to our head that we don't recognize, because fear and irritation and anxiety show up in the body, that we don't recognize what's happening here until it hurts. Or until we said something stupid or forgotten what to say. So the first step is to even recognize, I'm having an emotional reaction. Mm-hmm. And then to be able to stop and say, what is it that I'm afraid of? What's the challenge here? What's the worst that could happen, really? What will happen if I do this? What are all the possible consequences, and what's the possible gain? To start sorting it through on a logical basis, because the fear is usually irrational. But we don't have emotions based on logic. So we have the reaction, and if we can notice, look, I'm having an emotion. What's that about? And that's, applying the reflective intelligence, and then the emotional intelligence is choice. I'm having an emotion. What is it I actually want to feel in this moment? And emotional intelligence means to be able to choose how you want to feel in the moment, as well as to recognize what's going on with the people you are with.
And therefore, you also think that there's some kind of difficulty in an organization communicating across organizational lines. Would that add to the problems many times as well within an organization? Well,
the larger the organization, the more foggy communication gets. Take email. It's always emotionally misinterpreted.
Yeah.
To whatever the person's going on in their mind at the moment. Sometimes I have to go back and read an email 3-4 times before I get, that's what they mean.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then people are speaking in such a hurry that they're not recognizing the impact of their choices, their own words, and their own emotions. So they're in a hurry, and so you say something to them, they seem anxious or irritated. It may not be about you, but I'm going to assume, it's about me because you're expressing that. And so there's so much emotional impact that's going on without recognition. And that's a lot of the anxiety. Every time I teach this, again, anywhere in the world, I have an exercise where I ask them, so name the 2 most common emotions that everyone's feeling right now at work, because I want them to feel that emotion while they're trying to listen. And everywhere I go in this world, it's the same thing. It's frustration, under pressure, anxiety, tired. and so there's this at least a low, if not high level of anxiety that's on a daily basis in all organizations. And this has to be dealt with. And so it's not about business acumen and making the best choices until we look at well, wait a second, how is our emotions impacting how we're thinking and how we're speaking? We have to look at that first.
So how can somebody, is someone much more comfortable speaking if they're more comfortable within the position that they are in the organization?
Do you mean, I'm not sure what you mean. You mean
Okay.
comfortable with their title?
Yeah, well, even the title or the position that they're in, they're very comfortable in the position they're in. They work and function very well within that area.
Okay.
Does that make it easier for them to communicate?
No.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
You know, a technical capability has nothing to do with communication capability.
Yeah.
So and being very comfortable and confident with my ability to do my work doesn't mean that I have any capacity to connect and communicate with others. They're two different competencies.
Okay.
And too many times people are promoted based on their technical capability, which they're quite competent about, but are totally inadequate to lead and to connect and inspire other people. And the higher they go up, the less likely they go to training. And that's why a lot of times people are using coaching for like one-on-one training, which isn't what coaching is, but if that's what they need,
Yeah.
at least they're getting something. But companies really need to look at both hiring and promoting, that they need to have both. It's like, here's technical capability, but will this person be a good team member? And will they be a good leader? They really have to look at that capacity as well in order to keep the organization fully, high performing as best as possible, especially in this age where there's so much anxiety.
I'm reading a book on popularity. How much does likability have to assist in becoming better as a communicator? If you like someone, are they much better to communicate with than someone that obviously you have some reservations about, I guess?
You know, it's an interesting question. Because, you know, even the word likability is a generalized term. So if I like you, I'm going to think better about whatever it is you're saying. So I'm not going to judge you negatively. I'm probably even going to let you slide on a few things. If I don't like you, then I'm going to judge whatever you say from a negative perspective. So yes, likability will have an impact. You know, nice people are probably listened to better. And on the other hand, you know, I was talking to this woman yesterday about the whole concept of charisma, that charisma does not mean presence and does not mean that someone has any capability of understanding what's happening on an emotional level or even connecting. That in fact, some of the most charismatic people in the world are diagnosable as borderline personality. They're narcissists.
Yeah.
You know, so do
sociopaths?
They communicate? Well, not necessarily.
Yeah. Sociopath as well. It seems to be something
right,
that they can look at. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
you know, so again, what does likability necessarily mean in that context?
The other thing I've been looking at is neuropsychology neuropsychology that you have. There's this debate, obviously, that goes on constantly. You've probably been asked this 100 times. Is there a difference in the brains of women and men, and does that have an impact upon, or what kind of impact does that have on the leadership skills or leadership ability?
You know, years ago when they were first defining and being able to scan the brain, they said there were some biological differences, particularly like the connector between the right and left brain, which gives women the ability to multitask a little bit better, but men focus better. Since then, though, that has even been somewhat debunked, that the brain of a baby boy and girl are pretty much the same. what happens as we socialize and what we learn, then you're going to have different transmitters that form and different connections. So that women tend to be maybe more emotionally sensitive is only because we've been socialized that way.
Yeah.
A lot of young men are being socialized that way now as well. And so even the ability to focus or switch gears quickly is a learned behavior. So I wouldn't say, no, biologically from the beginning, there's not been any studies that have indicated that there's biological differences. It's how we've been socialized, what we use. Much of the brain operates like a muscle.
Mm-hmm.
What you use expands, what you don't use atrophies, and how connections are made are based on what you focus on and what you learn. So we can learn to do anything in terms of like communication and connection. It may be more difficult, for men or women in certain contexts, but only because it's not been something they've used, and so it's not well developed.
There's so much going on now with these people who are harassing or accosting women. How do you think that a person who is a leader of an organization, and let's make it a small organization, because obviously if you're some of these guys that have been recently talked about, like Weinstein or them, they're being axed by the big companies and gotten rid of. Charlie Jones the same, same way.
Charlie Rose, yeah.
Yeah, Charlie Rose. I said Jones, didn't I? Charlie Rose, same way. I mean, they just got fired. But how can a person who's maybe in a smaller organization make women feel comfortable to come forward? Especially about the one boss. They were talking on NPR just the other day. This one woman was talking to a reporter and said she didn't want her name mentioned or anything like that because she's still working right next door to the person that's harassing her, and it's a small company, and she just doesn't feel comfortable going forward. How could a leader make these people feel like they have the ability to come forward?
The whole fear of consequence. A company has to be very clear that there won't be. I mean, I've known years ago, I had a friend who had a harassment lawsuit, and this was like 20 years ago when there weren't that many of these, and they settled with her, but then she had a very difficult time getting work, and she moved to a different state, and it followed her. So it was like on her record that she had this, and no company wanted to touch her. And so there was real consequences. And the idea, I can remember many times, I think every woman I know has had a boss that has said, well, if you want to get on my good graces, or even in college, the whole thing around grades, we've been approached, and how we handled it may have been different, but it's not abnormal. I believe it's a systemic problem that I'm pleased that people are speaking about it. Whether it's exaggeration or not, it doesn't matter. It needs to come forward. And boys need to be raised differently to say, that's just not right. It's just not right to do that. That the whole movement right now of, we have a right to be left alone. But why is it that women aren't respected as colleagues and high performers on the same level? So there has to be a safety for a woman just to say, that's not cool, don't do that. And if you do it again, I'm going to tell somebody. There has to be safety for that. And that has not existed here. And will this movement change it? I hope so, but I'm not sure.
One last question. Talking about that, what aspect do you think, is it a power situation? Because that's what I've always heard before, but that's usually dealing with something like rape. But what is it within men in particular, that once they reach a certain level of leadership, at least in position, Why is it that they want to do that to women? I mean, Charlie Rose walks into him with his robe on and it's wide open, and the same thing happened with Weinstein. And I mean, it's
Yeah.
crazy to me. I can't get my
But
mind
that
around
is,
it.
well, that is the word if you want to like say non-technical. But you know, there is a difference between when there's a real violation like that, and I do believe there's a pathology related to it. Or again, the craziness that any man would think that women like that. You know, and I think again that it's a conversation we need to have to say, you know, when you do that, that's not enjoyable. In fact, it's gross.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know, that
But
they
does it?
know
But moving
that
into
we don't want to see that. That's
but,
crazy. And so again, I think there's a conversation that needs to be had about what is appealing to women or not. Now that's over here. It's, you know, the non violations in terms of you know, it's sexually related, but just the comments and even the jokes, you know, that's something else over here. And again, I think that is a conversation that needs to be had, and it's a different conversation, because I think a lot of times that's more about ignorance than it is about something's wrong with you. You know? That just to say, and not to say, well, then I won't say anything. I mean, don't get defensive about it. Let's just have a conversation about how that makes me feel when you say those things.
but does moving into, do you think that it triggers something within the person, or the person is that way anyway? But it seems like moving into a position of some type of leader, Weinstein, Charlie Rose, you know, the gentleman down in Alabama, Moore. I mean, does moving into a leadership type of position seem to escalate it, or?
You know, there has been some research lately, Mel, around what happens in the brain of someone who takes on power, and there seems to be some shifts and a loss of empathy. And I'm not an expert in that, but they're just starting to do a lot of research around that something does go on with the acceptance of power that goes on in the brain. If that's the case, though, again, because the brain is so flexible, that if we can recognize what goes on in the brain, we can then learn other things. So that's not like a permanent thing, but to then bring into the conversations and even leadership classes that here's tendencies that happen with power. So let's just take a look at that. I think that's a great conversation, and you know, beyond just you know, sexuality and cultural awareness, the tendency to lose some sensitivity and empathy. Can we bypass that? Can we take a look at it and deal with it?
That's I guess that's a note that we'll have to pick up sometime in the future, because we're running out of time. But I want to thank you so much, Marcia, for allowing me to interview you. And at the end of all the interviews, I allow the person, because of the time that they spent, to plug their book or anything they wish to plug at this time. So you can take it away.
Okay, thank you, Mel. Well, my website is outsmartyourbrain.com. And so if you go there, there's a free ebook, and I blog every month on topics that I think are of interest to leaders and coaches. So you can go there, and if you have questions, you can always email me. You can contact me from there, outsmartyourbrain.com. And the book I mentioned is called The Discomfort Zone. And it's how leaders can turn difficult conversations into breakthroughs. So how to use coaching technique and a coaching approach to your difficult conversations. As well as my book, Outsmart Your Brain, which will help you recognize those emotions.
Well, I'll have to pick up those two books myself when I get a chance. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. And take care, and hopefully we'll get to talk to you again sometime in the future, and maybe it won't be such a at least end on a more positive note, maybe.
Let's do that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mel.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.